Hello Spartans, welcome to week 2, set 2, instruction 1. In this instructional video, we're going to take a look at the 8 characteristics of civilization. When you finish that, you will proceed to the SWIC, and then you will proceed to the next assignment, which is the completion of the 4 spice charts for the 4 ancient civilizations. In this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the 8 characteristics of a civilization. We want to be able to identify our key components of every civilization. We're going to define civilization immediately, and we're going to see that every civilization is basically a complex society that first grew from the development of cities after the Neolithic or agricultural revolution. This brought so many changes for humans because people were now settling down. They became sedentary. They grew their own food and they lived in one place. Most scholars believe and agree that there are 8 features of civilization. The first feature that we come across is writing. And that's because civilizations needed to keep track or keep an account of what they owned, what goods were traded, and how much food they had in storage. Writing became more and more important because of the increased amount of information that they were required to write down. The history of a dynasty, the birthright, and especially property ownership. We see that the Chinese had their own specific way of writing, and that was usually earliest writing was in the format of characters. So things looked like characters. We see that in cuneiform, and we also see it in hieroglyphics. Ancient civilizations also included advanced cities. Farmers settled along the fertile river valleys, and as they grew a surplus of food, they also saw an increase in population. This eventually led to villages and eventually large urban centers. Cities, large urban centers usually became centers of trade because city dwellers created goods that could be traded. City dwellers also filled government and religious roles. Usually, we saw an organization of a central government within every civilization. Growing populations made it necessary to create a system of ruling. Early rulers were usually monarchs. Leaders were needed to maintain law and order and to establish laws. Government was also responsible for overseeing trade and commerce and running and maintaining the cities. Governments also directed people's behaviors and made life orderly. And finally, governments were supposed to make and enforce laws, collect taxes, and protect the people. Governments also had Civilizations also created complex religions. This is a set of spiritual beliefs, values, and practices that were shared by these particular civilizations. Religious leaders conducted these elaborate ceremonies, usually to appease the gods and ensure a bountiful harvest. Religious ceremonies were usually conducted in temples, and religious leaders their job was to make sacrifices to ward off drought, famine, or invasion. As civilizations grew, job specialization became very important. Job specialization means specific jobs with requirements or specialties. Growing cities need specialized workers to meet the needs of the things that they needed. So they needed bricklayers, they needed people who could weave, they needed people who were bronze workers. And so there were a lot of requirements. They also needed people who could create luxury items. Food surplus really provided the need for specialized skills from workers. Fewer people were required to work in agriculture, so this created a great opportunity for people to develop skills, for workers to develop and refine skills for one specific task. Again, we're talking about craftspeople, people who did more than just farm. Civilizations also divided themselves into social classes. These groups had a common economic, cultural, and political status. These groups were distinguished from each other by their wealth, by property ownership, and most importantly, by their political rights. As jobs became more specialized, so did the status and the need for certain individuals. For example, religious leaders were usually more respected than unskilled workers because they had a really important job of conducting religious ceremonies, and they were probably educated. Skilled laborers were probably more respected than unskilled laborers because they provided a specific product that was needed by the society. And finally, we come to art and architecture. And this is where all civilizations had a really highly developed culture, including the arts. Art includes creative forms of expression such as painting, architecture, literature, and music. Those are the 8 characteristics of every civilization. And as you move forward, I certainly hope that you will keep those elements in mind as you look to the next aspect of the assignment.